Let's now turn our attention to the command section of the tool panel, which affects the entire mesh assigned to a given Retopo layer. So for example, if I were to click the transform tool, it will move the entire object. Let's hit escape. However, if we choose the select tool in the add geometry section and then choose whichever mode we want to work in, whether it's faces, edges, or vertices, we can make a selection and transform just that particular selection. So I hit escape, and then if I hit escape a second time, it will drop the selection. So I will undo. Let's select the second polygon. And one of the most versatile tools you'll see in this section is the transform tool. But before I do that, you'll notice a difference here. You no longer see the command section. It's actually split into two parts, the entire mesh, and then you have a separate section for just the selected components. So with these faces selected, I'll choose the transform tool. By default, it's oriented in world space, but you can select main axis. That's basically a localized orientation. If I were to hit escape and then later come back to the transform tool, it's still going to be oriented in world space. If I want that to remain in local space each time I come back, then I can check this option. So let me hit escape, and again, I'll come back to the transform tool. You can see now it's already oriented. So that just saves me a step if I'm accustomed to working in this way. With that done, if I try to make a transform, you can see it's going to move just the selected subcomponents. I'll undo. However, it has some built-in functionality that allows you to extrude on the fly. Let me hit escape to drop the tool and drop a selection. I'll go to edges mode to try and demonstrate. In 3ds Max, if you have an open edge, and if I hold the shift key while either moving, rotating, or scaling, then it will create new geometry, so it extrudes on the fly. This can do it as well. Let's go to the transform tool. And if I go ahead and move my gizmo, obviously it's going to move only these edges. But if I click commit extrusion, then it committed those edges and it gave me new edges to extrude. Now, I can also move the pivot point on the fly by holding down the shift key. And I can reposition it if I need. Okay, so now that I've changed my pivot point, I can rotate it. I'll hit escape. I can hold down the shift key and select those edges as well. Go back to the transform tool. Move both of those edges. And now hit escape to drop the tool. I can go into faces mode. Hit escape. I can just brush select these faces or use any one of these selection marquees if I prefer. So with that done, I'm going to go back to the transform tool. This time, rather than clicking commit extrusion, I can hit the enter key instead. And that's going to allow me to extrude faces. Let's go ahead and hit the enter key to commit that. We will extrude again. And now we've created a little bit of a bevel. I can hit the enter key again. This time, go inward, enter, come out. And now I'm ready to clear this. Now I can select all the faces by double clicking. That's going to select all the contiguous faces on this layer. I'm going to hide this other one temporarily. And now let's choose the shell tool. I can extrude it inward or outward. I extruded this one outward. I'll hit escape. And a second time to drop that selection. When I'm in edges mode, I can also choose sharp selection. I'll hit OK. Now I can go ahead and bevel. Let me zoom in so I can see the preview. And I can adjust the size interactively. I'll hit OK. Now, if I want to send a copy of this to the Sculpt workspace, I can do that, much like I did previously in other videos. But before I do that, maybe I want to save a low polygon version. One thing I can do is come to the right side of the panel and just drag and drop it into the Retopo Models palette. In this case, I can use another tool from the Commands section that allows me to clone this, to which I can either modify the original or the new version. So let me go back to Faces mode, select the entire object. I could also choose Select All Faces on Layer here. In this section, again, I want to clone this, so I'll click Clone Tool. And all I need to do to commit this is to hit the Enter key or Apply. It's already created a new layer, and it's going to place this new clone on that layer. It's asking, do I want to snap it to the underlying voxel object, which I do not. Okay, so I'll hide the original. And this is our copy. So we can now subdivide. But before I do that, I want to mention, if you have Auto Snap checked, when you subdivide, it's going to try and snap at the same time, and that's not what we want. It'll create a mess. So make sure to uncheck Auto Snap. Now we can either subdivide here, or again, I can subdivide the entire mesh, or subdivide just the parts that I want. Let's choose Entire Mesh, Subdivide. I'll subdivide a second time. Now let's go to the Sculpt room, and I'm going to create a new layer. In the previous video, I showed how you can quickly get a copy of your Retopo mesh into this workspace. So you can do it from the geometry menu. In this case, I've already created a hotkey for that. So I hit R, and now I have a brand new copy. So I can hide that version, and I can use this as my Retopo version. You'll notice as I select different sub-object modes, contextually my menus or my options will change. In auto mode, you can hover over the center of a polygon, click it, and it switches you to Faces mode. I'll hit Escape, go back to auto mode, and the same thing will happen if I hover over an edge or a vertex. I'm going to increase my brush size here, right bracket key. Let's go to Transform tool. I'll hit Escape. If I want to apply symmetry across a given axis, I can do that later on. I don't necessarily have to have the symmetry plane active while I'm working. I can come to the entire mesh section, click Symmetry, and that's going to copy it to the other side. But before I commit that, I need to enable symmetry along the plane that I want to utilize. And now I can go ahead and click Symmetry. Also should mention that when you are working with symmetry, by default, it has you in mirror mode. And that's just going to give you a preview of what it will look like after you hit Apply Symmetry. So let me undo, and I'm going to turn symmetry off. In the Retopo menu, again, virtual mirror mode is going to be on. So it looks like it's applied symmetry, but it hasn't. It's just a preview. And me personally, I do not like working this way because it can easily trick you into thinking you have geometry over here that isn't present. So you may opt to uncheck that. And then whenever you're applying symmetry, you're getting polygons, not just a preview. Let's turn symmetry off for the moment. Skipping forward just a little bit, I'm going to now pick up the pace so that we can get through all the remaining tools for faces and edges selection. In Faces mode, if I select some polygons, I can expand or contract the selection. Normal extrude, let me select a few faces here. If you hover over the tool, you'll see an explanation that mentions it's going to use the average of the normals between the selection. So whereas extrude faces or extrude verts would actually extrude along the individual normals, this one's going to use the average of the normals. As you can see, I can flatten these. I can even perform kind of a global scale. So I will undo a few times and hit Escape to drop the tool. Let me go ahead and select these again. And extrude faces and extrude verts are very similar because they're going to extrude along the normals. So you won't see much of a difference between the two, except in very rare circumstances, especially if you have a lot of vertices that are in the same area. Let's go ahead and select extrude faces. Hit Escape and escape a second time. I'll select these over here and extrude verts. Again, not a lot of difference. So just a bit of redundancy, but again, there are circumstances where one may be preferable to the other. There's also some redundancy in free extrude because it existed before the transform tool, and a lot of the same features that you have in the transform tool exist in free extrude as well, just for the sake of consistency across the application. For example, you select some faces here and perform a free extrude. You have many of the same options here. I can hit enter. So there's a bit of redundancy, and it's to the point that Andrew could just remove this tool. I'll hit escape. All right, intrude. I'm going to use a different object here. If I select some faces, it's going to create a shell except for these faces, and it's also going to remove these faces. So I'll click intrude and use my gizmo to push in or out. You can see how it created thickness and punched out those polygons. So I'll hit escape and I'll undo a few times. Okay, so I'll hide that. Go back to our low polygon version. Separate is essentially like selecting a group of faces, creating a brand new layer, and then choosing move selected faces to current layer. But it just creates the layer for you, and when you hit the enter key or apply, then it's going to move those faces. So it just saves you a step or two. Hide. Pretty self-explanatory. You can hide faces, and then later you can invert the hidden, and then unhide. So that covers all the tools for the faces selection. Let's now move to edges. And we have the same type of tools for expand and contract. Cut edges. Let me select an edge. And we have edge ring and edge loop tools. So I can choose edge loop. I'll undo that. Edge ring. And then cut edges. We can enter a numeric value for the number of loops that we want here. Let's use 2. Okay. Creates new vertices along that selection. And now we can click connect. Let's hit escape. If I haven't already mentioned scale, it just allows you to enter a numeric value. You can also use axial scaling or radial scaling in the appropriate circumstance. So I'll click cancel. With the transform tool, you can use scale here as well to enter the value numerically. All right, so I'll hit escape. Now if you have a special edge selection, and you want to store them and reload them, you can do that here. You can clear the selection as well. You also have the ability to turn edges if you need. Let me hit escape to drop that selection. So let's say I've got a cut here. Let me make sure I'm in the right UV set. There we go. If I go back to select tool and edges mode, select an edge, I can rotate it. Hit the delete key to remove it. Let's select edge ring. If I want to split, I can click that here. And it's basically like using the split rings tool. If you have a specific selection, for example, just select these, again, split tool. It just allows you to use the split rings tool in a more confined and restricted manner. Another thing I should point out is if you happen to have an edge selection created, you can actually make seams out of it by choosing select seams. You can also delete seams as well. So that's going to be a quick look at the command section in 3D Code's Retopo workspace. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.